Corey Hughes Bloody History. We're back. We're going to continue on. I don't know if we're going to be able to wrap this up today. About 60-something pages left. Maybe we'll get this finished up tomorrow, but we're going to try to wrap up this and Goodpasture deposition from 95. Because I want to go back to the 76 deposition of David Atlee Phillips. And so I'm trying to get through all this Mexico City stuff, but there's a lot of it. I mean, people have written whole books on this stuff. I mean, they got to be complete fluff, considering you could probably compress all the information of Mexico City down into like one chapter of one book and still mention everybody's name. So let's continue from here. They just got back from a break, and it says, my first question to Miss Goodpasture is, prior to today, have you ever seen this document, now marked Exhibit Number 2, in the condition that it currently is? She says, I don't know. I can't answer that. I really can't. I'd like to draw your attention then to the attachments to the document and ask whether you're familiar with those documents at this point. This is just a very general way to see if you've seen this before. This is a copy of one of the documents that you sent to me that I saw. Whether it's accurate or transcript or not, I couldn't say without comparing it to their chronos. As far as the form is concerned, it looks like it. Okay, I'd like to draw your attention to the document, one-page portion that is marked in the bottom as attachment E to the document. Which one? Attachment E, okay? E, which appears to be a 1 October 63 intercept, and ask, have you seen that particular document, or are you acquainted with it? Well, I saw this when you sent it down. It looks like a copy of the transcript, but I would have to compare it to the chronos to be sure it's the same. Without speaking to the accuracy of the particular words that are contained, does it generally resemble that you remember from your service in Mexico City as relating to Oswald? Well, I remember is the one that the name was in. All right, so let me just refresh everybody's memory real quick, okay? So Ann Goodpasture and all those cunts down in fucking Mexico City are a bunch of liars. Oswald is confirmed. Oh, well, not Oswald. We know it was Kerry Thornley, but for the sake of the story, Oswald is confirmed to have been to the Soviet and Cuban embassies a total of 5 times, right? Twice the Cuban, 3 times the Soviet. And mysteriously, despite the fact that they had a full-on 3 surveillance teams of the embassies, and despite that, they never got a single photograph of the person who said that they were Oswald, for various reasons. Now, I don't believe that the fucking CIA shuts their cameras off at 5 p.m. and that they don't work on weekends. Do you believe that the CIA takes weekends off? Do you believe the CIA shuts their cameras off at 5 p.m.? No, I don't think so. So what that means is that they're fucking lying, and everybody here who was involved in Mexico City is a lying cunt. And Goodpasture, David Atlee Phillips, Alan B. White, Robert Shaw, Wynne Scott, the Tarasovs, who were the translators, right? We'll get to them. But thus far, there had to have been a concerted effort to not get photographs and to not pick up on any of the stuff that went on with allegedly Oswald down in Mexico City, right? So that's what's going on, and we're going over the Ann Goodpasture deposition from 95. It's the newest document we've ever had on this show, I believe. But yeah, she's a liar. They're all fucking liars. Everyone knows she's a fucking liar, because how incompetent is the CIA to not have been able to catch Oswald on film when they was confirmed to be at the embassies 5 times that they were spying on, right? So give me a fucking break. It's ridiculous to think otherwise. And well, let's continue. And would that be attachment F to the document? And she says that would be F, and all I remember about that was that a transcript that involved the name of an individual, and that was the one that was actually taken on. So here's the deal. The only thing that they have, allegedly, of Oswald is a recording from the Cuban embassy where he calls the Soviet embassy, and that happened on October 1st, allegedly. But the problem I have with all this is that the trail they set up for Oswald, it was either his visa or the bus ticket, I forget, that was stamped September 30th, meaning he should have been leaving Mexico on September 30th. So therefore, October 1st, for him to have had this conversation, doesn't really jive with me. We don't see Thornley again till he pops up in Alice, Texas on October the 3rd, right? So he could have still been there, but why would they buy the bus ticket or have the visa stamped on September 30th, right? It's just another just showing how sloppy they were. All right. So as far as you were aware, are you the first person to have identified the transcript of an October 1st, 63 intercept with Oswald's name on it and requested action be taken on that intercept? Well, I don't know, but what someone at the base may have called Win Scott, I can't remember that. The Russian translator was in touch with the Soviet people. They could have called in. Excuse me, when you said, I'm the person that picked up the transcript, if that's what you're getting at. First, in your previous statement, when you say the Soviet people, you mean the CIA. Do you mean the CIA people working in the Soviet area? Right. When you saw this transcript, what did you do with it? I took them and gave them to people working in our office in our Soviet affairs, the redacted. Did you recommend that action be taken on the document? Oh, it was not my job to do that. They were the ones who always took the action when it was necessary. Now, there may have been cases when Win Scott would have said, make sure and cable this is sent out, and I would go and say, boss, this is what he wants, this sent out, a cable, but I don't recall doing any of this in this case. But they were anxious to report it also. It was in their fear of operations. In terms of your understanding of the standard operating procedure in Mexico City, what should the redacted have done when they received this transcript of the October, it says October 21st intercept? Well, normally they would check file traces. The best way to answer you would be to say that I would have, what I would have done if I had action on it, because the redacted were not under my supervision. And I don't want to appear to be criticizing them, but I would have gotten a file trace. I think they're talking about the Tarasovs. And gone to see if we had a record of this man. Then I would have checked to see when we would get photographs for the day, put it all together and send it to Washington, the results from the file trace, whatever we had in the way of photographs and summary of the transcript, and ask for headquarters traces. Do you know yourself what the redacted did do after receiving the transcript? A cable was sent, but I don't know. You would have to ask them for the other. Let me show you a document that I would have marked Exhibit 3. The second document will be Exhibit 4. While Ms. Goodpasture is examining the documents, I will identify them for the record. Exhibit 3 appears on its face to be a cable dated 8th of October 63 that appears to be from Mexico City Station to headquarters. Exhibit number 3 has the cable number MEXI 6453. Exhibit 4 appears on its face to be a copy received in CIA headquarters dated 9 October 63, having the same site number, MEXI 6453. The first document... Did you say October 9th? Yes, or 8th. The first one is 8th of October, right? The second is October 9th. Okay. Ms. Goodpasture, in your answer to my previous question, you made reference to a cable having been sent from Mexico City to headquarters. Are Exhibits 3 and 4 the cables which you are making reference? Yeah, I think it is. Ms. Goodpasture, did you have any responsibility for writing, approving, or reviewing the cables as marked Exhibits 3 and 4? My only responsibility, the way I remember it, was I think I checked the photographs and gave them a copy of the photographs. That you gave Mr. Redacted a copy of the photographs. Yeah, or his wife, whoever wrote the cable. I think she wrote it. When you say the photographs, are you referring to the information contained this paragraph too, in paragraph number 2? Does paragraph, and then the question's withdrawn. Paragraph 2 refers to a photograph taken on October 1st. Did you see that reference? Pardon me? Did you see a reference to an October 1 photograph in the second paragraph? Yes. Is it your current understanding that there was an October 1 photograph showing an individual whose description is provided in paragraph 2? I thought that was the day, but you mentioned earlier, but you thought the date was the 2nd. That's the question. Yeah. Do you have any current recollection whether the photograph in question was taken October 1st or October 2nd? You know, you'd have to check the log. The logs were, and the negatives, there should be a date log and all the negatives together on the date of when they were made and the shots that were taken. Do you have any recollection of having previously looked into the issue of whether the photograph in question was taken on October 1st or 2nd? No. Did you yourself have any question or doubt about the appropriateness of referring to the October 1st cable, October 1st photograph in the MEXI 6453? Yes, I did. I didn't want to send the photograph until it was identified. And why was that? Because I felt that what would happen would be, could well be a photograph of someone else and it might identify as Oswald, or that there would be the wrong identification. When did you state that opinion? At that time. And whom did you state it to? Well, I don't remember now. The way I remember it was, so of course she doesn't remember who she stated her opinion to, even though there's only like 2 people in the whole fucking building that are fucking higher than her, right? Alan White and fucking Win Scott and maybe occasionally David Atlee Phillips. Well, I don't remember now. The way I remember it was that I wanted to hold the photograph at the station. I felt that it should not be sent out, that she should ask Washington to send us a photograph of Oswald. Now, that's the way I remember it. Who made the decision to include the second paragraph in the cable? Well, Win Scott signed off on it, so obviously he's the one who made the decision. Do you recall any discussions that you had with Win Scott about the appropriateness of including the October 1 photo? I don't remember if we talked, if I talked to him about it. You might ask Tom Keenan about that because I can't really remember. But I just, my memory is that I felt we should distribute the photographs. This was not really the photograph at the time. The photograph was sent was later. This was just saying that we had a photograph of a person, and what I remember was not wanting to distribute the photograph for fear that it would get into the public domain before we had an opportunity to do anything about the people doing the work, which came later. In this paragraph, you're referring to the second paragraph. Yeah, it may have been later when I had such strong feelings about the photograph. In the first paragraph, it makes reference to Valery Vladimirovich Kostakov. Did you have any understanding at that time who Mr. Kostakov was? I don't remember. Do you know whether there was ever any time when you suspected that Mr. Kostakov may be KGB? I don't remember that either. All right, let's see if we can't pull everything on Valery, Valeriy, Vladimirovich Kostakov, Kostikov. I've never seen this name before, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was our Mr. Saul Sage, and it was his identity's been in front of us the whole time. You never know. So let's see if we can't pull that and see what his deal is. Do you know whether there was ever a time when you suspected Mr. Kostakov may be KGB? I don't remember that either. Was there anyone in Mexico City in the CIA station responsible for identifying KGB officers in the Soviet embassy? Yes, the redacted were. Before we had someone assigned, excuse me, they're from the Soviet division. I worked with Harry Mahoney, and we made some identifications from photographs. When someone from the Soviet division came down, they took over that function. Was that an important part of the redacted mission or redacted area of responsibility to identify KGB officials? Well, I can't answer that because I'm not sure what all of his functions, how his functions were listed in my importance. My off the top of my head answer would be that his most important function would be to recruit agents. Do you know whether there was ever any attempt made to recruit Mr. Kostakov? I don't know. If you had been responsible for sending the cable identifying an American male meeting with somebody in the Soviet consulate, would it have been important to you to determine whether the person was the American met with was a KGB official? It may have and it may not have, because I think the Soviets rotated their people who answered the door or the gate and the telephone depending on whether they spoke English or Spanish or not. That's a question you probably have to ask the Soviet desk officer. If you had been responsible for sending the cable, and if you had known that Mr. Kostakov was a member of or officer of KGB, would you have included that information in the cable to headquarters? Not necessarily, because people at headquarters would have known they would have known it if I had known it, and they would have had their traces. They were going to do a file trace, and that's when you send a cable. You were trying to limit the amount of material that you put into it to something that was not repetitious. If it were the first time his name would have appeared, then I would have included everything about him. But if it was just someone that had been in traffic back and forth, just a name would have been enough. What are the circumstances in which a cable should be sent to headquarters as opposed to a dispatch related to something like an American visiting the Soviet consulate? Almost all of this was sent. All the names of people who were thought to be Americans were sent by cable. Was there a reason for it going by cable? The dispatch usually took a lot longer time. They went out by courier. They went out once a week, I think it was, and it took a lot longer to get an answer back. They weren't handled as quickly on either end of either headquarters or the New Mexico station as cable traffic went. Do you see in the left-hand side where it refers to the cable as being routine with X's next to it? Yes. Is it your first understanding that this cabling, based upon what you can identify about it, was a cable that was sent by routine? Well, I think what that meant, if it was priority, they got somebody out of bed at night. If it was routine, they handled it first thing the next morning. So routine would still mean very prompt action. I think that was the action required on the other end. For an activity such as American meeting with a Soviet consul, should that information have been sent more quickly than than was cable 6453? I don't know. I couldn't answer that. If it had been your responsibility, would you have sent the cable sooner than 7 days after the contact? Depends upon the circumstances, and also at the time we had certain established procedures for handling information. I don't know why it was held up this long. I don't know whether the 8th of October was on a Monday or whether it was on in the middle of the week. But we had numerous cases of people whose name we got in touch with, either the Cuban embassy or Soviet embassy, that didn't develop into anything. They were not priority cases. We were instructed rather, from Washington to report travel information. We were not authorized to conduct investigations of American citizens. If we thought they were American citizens, we sent them in routine. Then it was headquarters' place to determine the priority or what they wanted us to do from there on. That was my understanding of it. When an American contacted either the Soviet or Cuban consulate, would it be fair to say that Mexico City Station did not report that information to the FBI legate until after the station received clearance or instructions from headquarters? I think it would be, the way I remembered it was that it was always reported to Washington first, and Washington disseminated it to the other agencies involved. Now, if it came the other way around, if Washington asked us to look for someone, it would be handled differently. I'd like to point out one minor difference between the two cables, and that has to do with the text of the second paragraph, where in the original 6453 it refers to a balding top, speaking of the visitor, and the headquarters version, it refers to a typo, presumably blading, B-L-A-D-I-N-G or B-L-A-D-I-N-G top, as if the A and L are transposed. Do you have any understanding of whether the 9 October version, now marked Exhibit Number 4, would have been retyped or reformatted in headquarters? So let me just point this out. So now we know that the person who visited the embassy was balding. Okay, just like Harry Thornley. Let me screenshot that bitch. Boom. The L and the A are transposed in Exhibit Number 4, whereas they appear to be correct in Exhibit Number 3. I think that's this. When you say this, you're referring to Exhibit 4? Yeah, that this is the copy that Washington typed up from the copy that was sent from Mexico, and I suppose it's a typographical error. Okay, could you look at the top of Exhibit Number 4 in the info line and note the components of CIA to which are receiving information from 6453? Can you identify any of these entities that are on the information line? Those are divisions or staffs at headquarters, and I could identify some of them, but I can't identify all of them. I think this stands for Soviet Division. That's this you're pointing to. That section right there, just like Western Hemisphere, is WH8. This would be Soviet number 7. You're referring to SR7? Right. This would be Foreign Intelligence. That's the FI. Yes, this would probably be International Communism. And CIIC, that's Counterintelligence Opposite, and that's CI staff. Do you know, I don't know what RF or VR is. Do you have any, I'm not sure about those others, that's my guess. Do you have any understanding as to why the entities that you've just identified as being possibilities for information on this cable might have been given information from this cable? What's that again? Why would those entities within the agency that you've just identified be receiving information on this cable? Oh, I don't know. They probably had a standard procedure of certain categories of materials, of cables that were automatically routed to certain offices, but I don't know. I wasn't in Washington at the time, so... Sure, now we talked earlier about where information would likely be routed in Washington, or how the reporting would go on Soviet, Russian, or on Cuban activities. The question I would have is, what interests would counterintelligence staff have in this cable in terms of your experience with counterintelligence? What interests might they have had in this cable? I think they got almost all the cables that involved the Soviet Union and contact with Americans, but I don't know. The person on the desk at that time might know. I'd like to point out a name to you at the top right-hand corner of Exhibit Number 4, which appears to be Bustos, B-U-S-T-O-S. Do you know who the name Bustos refers to? I think you've got it on another document. I don't remember the first name, but it was on the one that we just looked at. Does the name Charlotte Bustos? Right, she was a desk officer. Did you know her? Yes, I knew her. Did you know what her responsibilities were in 1963? No, but from this I assume she was in the Western Hemisphere Division. In fact, there was a cable you showed me a few minutes ago that I think came from the WH Division that had her as the originator up here, and it had her address under it or her location. Does it refresh your recollection if I say that I believe Mrs. Bustos was WH3 Mexico? Well, I don't know if she was Mexico or was on the staff, but she was in Washington. Do you recall having had any personal communications with Ms. Bustos in 1963? In 63, personal communications? I don't think so. I don't recall any. I may have, but I don't recall it. Okay, I would like to mark next to the document as exhibit number 5, and subsequent document as number 6. That's 5 and that's 6. And then Mr. Gunn says, wait, did I have any yellow highlight on it? And Ms. Seguin says, no. Mr. Gunn then says, okay, just this one. And then the next question is, I'd like to state for the record, exhibit number 5 appears on its face to be a routing and record sheet. Let me see. He's just going over the various routing and record numbers. Exhibit number 6 appears on its face to be FBI letterhead, dated September 24th, 63, from New Orleans, Louisiana, with topic Lee Harvey Oswald. The document contains 7 pages and can be identified for the purposes of this deposition as record identification. Okay. All right. So let me skip a whole bunch of that administrative stuff, and here we go. Ms. Goodpasture, let me ask you the first question, whether you have previously seen the document now marked number 5. I may have, but I don't remember it. Let me try the same question with exhibit number 6. Do you recall previously having seen a document marked exhibit number 6? This is page 6 here. This is exhibit 6, the whole document. Oh, the whole document. I can't identify it as having, I don't remember it. I may have read it before, but I don't remember. Okay, Ms. Goodpasture, so it's clear. It's my understanding exhibit number 5 has an attachment as a document that was identical to number 6, and that these two documents, 5 and 6, would have been together at CIA at one point. However, the document as numbered 6 did not come from CIA for this deposition, but came from the Office of Naval Intelligence. We've been unable to identify the equivalent version of document number 6 at the agency, but I do note that the document is 24 September 1963, and it contains the document number DBA 52355, and it's my understanding that DBA is a reference to FBI documents in the agency filing system. Ms. Goodpasture, can you identify the meaning of the abbreviations in the first line of exhibit number 5, where it appears to be CILS, date 4 October 1963? Then there are the initials of an officer. Have you previously seen documents of the sort that are exhibit number 5, that is? Are you familiar with routing and record sheets? Yes, I've seen these record sheets. I'm not sure I know all of what these sections are. Sure, just now go back to CILS. Does that mean anything to you? No, but I would guess it would be liaison, but I don't know whose initials those are. Are you familiar with the name Jane Roman? Jane Roman, I'm familiar with the name, yes. Do you know whether she was in CI liaison? I don't know. I'll say that it's my understanding that those are the initials of Jane Roman, but I say that based upon what my current understanding is. Could you go to line 3 and tell me if you can identify what the abbreviation SAS/CI stands for? No, I don't remember what that means. CZ might be Czechoslovakia. I don't think there's any such thing. If it was SAS/CI, would that mean anything? Not to me. Do you know whether there is a counterintelligence function within SAS? I don't know what SAS stands for. Are you familiar with Special Affairs Staff? No. Are you familiar with Task Force W? No. Does it refresh your recollection if I were to say Task Force W and SAS were divisions within the agency that were responsible for Cuba matters? It wouldn't refresh my memory because I wasn't up there at that time, and these were officers set up for headquarters routing at operations from headquarters. They were like branches, I guess. Could you look at line 10 and tell me whether you're familiar with the abbreviation there, withdraw that CISI? No, I don't remember what that is. Are you familiar with the name Anne Egeter, Egeter? I knew Anne many years ago that worked on the French desk. When did she work the French desk? Back in the 50s. Did you ever hear of her having subsequently been employed in counterintelligence staff? Not when I was working. Now her name surfaced in somebody's book. I would like to state for the record, but I didn't deal with her. I don't remember her being on that CI staff. She's a person who opened a 201 file on Lee Harvey Oswald in the 1950s. Well, I was not at headquarters during that time. You say 1950? 50s, I believe, 1959. Repeat that again. Did you say she opened a file on Oswald in 1959? Yes, at the time of his defection to the Soviet Union, she opened the 201 file on him. She must have gone from the French desk to, well, I don't know. Okay, I'd like to mark 2 more documents. We'll come back to this one. That's number 7 and number 8. While Ms. Goodpasture is looking at exhibits numbers 7 and 8, I will state for the record that exhibit 7 on its face appears to be a 10th of October 1963 cable DIR 74573. Possibly 673. It's kind of hard to see. With a record identification form number 104, 10015, 10052. And Exhibit 8 appears on its face to be DIR cable 74830, dated 10 October 63. With a record identification form number 104, 10015, 10048. My first question to Ms. Goodpasture is, have you previously seen the document that's now marked number 7? I think I saw this in Washington at some point, but I'm not sure. When you said that you thought you might have seen it in Washington, were you referring at any time into the 1960s? No, I'm referring to 1977 at the time of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Right, and with respect to exhibit number 8, have you ever seen that document before? Yes, I think this is the cable that came back to Mexico in answer to that cable, the one that had Oswald's name on it. Are you referring to the document that's been marked number 4? Yeah, I think it is. So in other words, exhibit 8 is the answer to exhibit 4. It is. In exhibit 8, do you see any reference to Cuban-related matters? This one? Yes. Do you see any reference to Cuba? Any reference to Cuba? No, I don't. Could you look at the first sentence? In fact, the only sentence in paragraph 3, exhibit number 8, where it refers to the latest headquarters information was ODA-CID, which refers to the State Department report dated May 1962. Do you see that line? Uh-huh. I would like to draw your attention back to exhibit number 6, which is a report on Lee Harvey Oswald being in the United States and being involved with Cuban-related matters. Do you see that in exhibit number 6? That first report? Right, exhibit number 6 is a report that apparently was in possession of the CIA. Yeah. At the time the cable, exhibit number 8 was written. I don't know if we had this station or not. There's no reason to believe that it was at the station. Yeah, that's exhibit number 6. It was not at the station. However, according to exhibit number 5, exhibit number 6 was at headquarters and had been in the CI liaison staff as of the 4th of October 63, which is approximately 6 days prior to the October 10th cable. Now, the question would be, first, if headquarters was in possession of information about Oswald being engaged in Cuban-related matters in the United States, if headquarters was aware of that, would it not be correct to say that the latest information that Oswald had was from May of 1962. True, I can't answer that. That's a headquarters document. But if headquarters, is there another report dated 62? There's another report. The report dated 62 is from the State Department while Oswald is still in the Soviet Union. And it would appear, and my question will be whether this would appear to be correct to you according to paragraph 3. Well, it might be that this person wrote this. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm just guessing. They might have done a file trace, and at that time, the more recent document may not have been indexed, so they may have been quoting from the results of a file trace. I don't know. Sure, I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of the third of the page where it makes reference to CI Liaison Roman and to line 1, which is the CILS, with the initials what appear to be and what I understand to be JR. I can't pass judgment on this because it was done in Washington by someone else, in all fairness. To them, there may have been such a volume of paper that she was signing off on, just as she automatically just signed off on anything that was sent down to her for coordination, as long as she didn't see any glaring errors. Let me point out on the bottom of page 3 of Exhibit 8, the reference to CISPG, and I believe the, what does SPG stand for? I believe that's a typo. It should be SIG, and that's a Special Investigations Group within CI, but it refers thereto to IGETR as well as to the CISI and the initials beginning initial A and E. It's been identified elsewhere that then this is an IGETR, the date, however, not being clear in this particular instance, but presumably after the 10th of October. Within your experience, if headquarters had been in possession of information about Oswald, who was a defector to the Soviet Union engaged in pro-Cuban activities in the United States in 1963, should that information have been communicated to the station in Mexico City? I should think they would have sent it. The only thing that may have kept them from sending it may have been an oversight that this may not have been in the central index. You're referring to Exhibits 5 and 6. I'm referring to this. And they had to, and when they did the traces, and they had to do so many traces every day that they sent out the gist of what turned up from the central file room, and things that were still out circulating didn't get into the mail. Indexing was the last thing they did. I shouldn't say that because I don't know, but I suspect that was the case in Mexico. When things were marked for indexing, they were routed around all over everywhere, and then they went in and they were indexed before they went to the graveyard. Okay, if I can draw your attention to Exhibit number 7, to the first paragraph, if you will recall, in the Exhibit number 4 and 5, the station separated the information that came from the telephone intercept and the information about the photo surveillance. Does it appear to you as if headquarters' link to those two pieces of information is the document now marked Exhibit number 7? Yes, and it is your opinion that that was a mistake. I would consider it a mistake. Let's go off the record for a moment, and they go off the record, and they come back on, and they have a bunch of documents they talk about. This is about a huge paragraph of them just confirming document numbers. So let me move on. Do you remember at any point the Mexico City station requesting from headquarters a photograph of Oswald? I thought they did. Do you remember at any time Mexico City station receiving a response to the request for a photograph of Oswald? You mean a Mexico City station answering this cable? No, the headquarters answering the Mexico City cable. They're sending us a photograph of Oswald. Yes. No, that was something that we was sitting and waiting for that to come. Do you remember receiving any communication from headquarters about a photograph? No, I think it was after the assassination we got a dispatch from headquarters with a photograph of Oswald in it. But it may have been, and I'm confusing something from headquarters with all the newspaper publicity. In the ordinary course, what should headquarters' response have been to the cable now marked Exhibit 9, requesting a photograph of Oswald? If they had one in the past, when we asked for photographs of people, they sent them right down. Would it be appropriate for headquarters if it did not have a photograph to inform Mexico City that there was no photograph? That's a point of view I think that it would be, but the Mexico City desk officer in Washington may have thought they may have asked the Navy or Marine Corps or something for a photograph, and they may not have. We'll just wait until it comes in and send it, so I really can't answer that. If headquarters did not have a photograph of Oswald, should headquarters have requested a photograph from the Navy or Marines or some other entity? I can't answer that because it might get into the business of conducting an investigation of a U.S. citizen without a court order. Would that same problem have been present for a request of a photograph of Oswald from Mexico City Station? Well, no, not necessarily, because we might have been able to find it in our records without conducting an investigation. We could have been completed our case, but here if we had gone back, if we had had something to compare by, like looking at a mug book or something, we could take the record files and scan them for a period of time and see if he had showed up before. If headquarters had a photograph of Oswald, the photograph would not have conformed with the description that we previously saw in the cables describing Oswald, or as describing the person as over 6 feet with a receding hairline. Isn't that correct? That's correct. Was it a matter of importance for the agency to be able to correctly identify Americans making contact with Soviet officials? Phrase that again? Could you just read the question back, and if it isn't clear, I'll try a different formation. Yes, it was. If Kostakov had been identified as a KGB officer, would the importance of correctly identifying an American visiting with Kostakov... Oh, Kostakov was the head guy at the Soviet embassy. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Who's the one who was on the phone, allegedly, with Oswald? Answer, I can't tell you, because in this case... you can't tell when Kostakov was acting as a reception officer and passport officer acting as an intelligence capacity. If it were simply a consular matter, he would have been just been a travel thing, but he may have alternated with the consular officer there, light duty officer or something. If the Mexico City station did not know the purpose of Oswald's contact with Kostikov, should it have presumed or should it have continued an investigation as if the matter could have been more serious than simply a consular contact? I'm not sure I understand the question. Let me try phrasing it another way. In response to my previous question, you said that it wasn't necessarily clear whether Oswald had just simply had a consular contact or it may have been with a KGB official. In the absence of the station knowing what their purpose of the contact was, should the station have presumed that it was simply a consular contact rather than a contact with a KGB official? Well, at that stage of the contact, I think we all felt that the first thing to do was to identify the individual and find out if he lived in the States or if he was going to stay in the States. And if so, the action would have been the FBI. All we had to do would be to identify him, then pass the information to the FBI, and they would take it from there. They were responsible for running the operations of all the U.S. citizens inside the U.S., and if it was just a one-shot trip to Mexico. But if there was an American citizen who lived in Mexico, then we may have wanted to get permission to make contact with him and try to develop an operation around him. If it were a casual contact with the Soviets, but I think at that stage, the only thing we were interested in was just identifying him to see if he was that guy, the same as the man that we could had in photograph in the photograph of. Okay, could you take a look at exhibit number 10? My first question will be whether you have previously seen the document now marked number 10. Oh, I must have. What's your question? My next question is, do you recall from the October 1st cable what the information that was contained in it referred solely to a visit or to a call to the Soviet embassy and a photograph of a person known to have visited the Soviet embassy? There's an additional piece of information in the 16th of October memo that refers to 28th September 63 conversation. Do you see that? Do you know how it was identified that there might be a connection between the October 1st intercept and reference to the September 28th intercept? 16 October, and what was your question now? How did the station come into possession of information that would link the 28th of September intercept to the 1st of October? I don't know. I don't remember. I'd like to show you again the 1st of October intercept as contained in exhibit number 2. And I'll read the part of the language where it says, "Hello, this is Lee Oswald speaking. I was at your place last Saturday and spoke to a consul, and they said they'd send a telegram to Washington, so I wanted to find out if you have anything new, but I don't remember the name of the consul." Now that statement refers to a place or to a visit the previous Saturday. Had you been responsible for handling the October 1st cable, would you have done anything in reference to a purported visit to the Soviet consulate on that Saturday? You mean like including in this same... in the first instance, I mean, just if you had seen the intercept from October 1st, would you have gone to look at photographs from the previous Saturday or possible telephone intercepts from the previous Saturday? I think we would have. Okay, so this is the greatest thing about this line of questioning, because the lawyers are trying to get some real answers, it appears, right? It doesn't appear that this is any kind of cover-up, although you can never tell with these fucking people, right? And I say that because what he's digging down to the nitty-gritty on is, look, you had this information, and this information, if it had crossed your desk, which it obviously had to cross your desk because you worked on this cable that went out on the 1st, and you got a response on the 10th. And so... And Goodpasture is right at the middle of this fucking thing, and they're asking her, well, you were the person who would have done this stuff if this information came across your desk. And obviously this did come across your desk because you're the one that sent the motherfucking cable, right? So she's here bullshitting with them. She obviously did. She obviously knew everything. She and Win Scott and fucking David Atlee Phillips and Robert Shaw and Alan B. White. These guys are all fucking in on this thing. They're all part of this operation. There had to have been way more cables that were sent that nobody's talking about. There had to have been phone calls made from payphones up the road, that kind of thing. But they're getting to the nitty-gritty of, well, why the fuck don't you know this? Because this crossed your desk. How can you not know this, right? So she says, I think we would have. And he says, wouldn't that be an obvious thing for a person to have done? Right. First question I would have is, prior to sending the October 1st cable, should the person who sent the first October 1st cable should have gone back to check to see if there was any tape from Saturday the 28th of September? They probably should have, but if they had the time and the haste of the volume of paperwork, it could have been overlooked, and they may have, I don't know. Would it be a reasonable assumption that by the time of the October 16th memorandum, someone had gone back and examined the intercepts from the 20th? I think it would. Could you turn to the document that's set out at attachment D, which appears to be a September 28th, 1963 intercept? Do you see anything in the September 28th intercept that makes any reference to Cuba? September 28th? Well, he's at the Cuba consulate here. Yes, so there's a reference to Cuba. Do you see any reference in the October 16th memorandum to Cuba? No. Should there have been, in the ordinary course, a reference to an American visiting the Cuban consulate in a memorandum such as that was prepared on October 16th? Well, I suppose if you were going to give them a summary of all the information, that should have been included. Now, I don't think all the information was included in this paragraph 2 here about his background. So once again, we have another document sent on the 16th, a memorandum sent on the 16th, a summary of events, where again, they do not even list this, even though they've already had all the communications back and forth between them on the first cable, the cable on October 1st and the cable on October 10th, right? These two cables have already fucking happened. They've already been handled. They're already well aware that the picture that they sent is not a picture of Oswald at this point, okay? But then when they send their summary of events on the October 16th memorandum, they don't mention any of this stuff. This is a clear-cut fucking CIA cover-up. Well, I suppose if you're going to give them a summary of all your information, it should have been included. Now, I don't think all the information was included in this paragraph 2, but here about his background. It says here we have no clarifying information with regards to this request. There is additional information about the consul from the Cuban embassy calling the Soviet consulate, though, isn't there? I think there may have meant there that we didn't have any further information on Oswald's activities there in Mexico and whether he received a visa or not, but I'm not sure. I think the purpose of this was to notify the officers in response to that cable that came back from Washington that a man named Oswald had made contact with the Soviet embassy and that he was a defector. And that's all the information that was passed at that time. Let's look partly at the sequence here. First, the station identifies an American going into the Soviet embassy. The station then learns from headquarters that the American who went into the Soviet embassy was a defector. Right. To the Soviet Union, and then they got that information from headquarters. The station then learns as of October 16th that Oswald had also visited the Cuban embassy. It isn't important. Isn't that important information? Well, it's important. I think this was an answer to following instructions from headquarters to pass the information locally. Now, I don't know why this information was about Cuba wasn't passed locally, but they may have decided to hold on to it or may have just overlooked it. Probably the most important thing to happen that whole fucking month in that station, and they just overlooked the reporting on it after it's already been discussed with Washington. Should the information about Cuba have been sent to headquarters? Well, as I told you earlier, I thought that the visit to the Cuban embassy, it didn't become apparent that the man unidentified man who wasn't identified as Oswald until after Sylvia Duran's arrest. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. That was my feeling about it. Well, the September 28th intercept does reference Sylvia Duran indirectly, Oswald, and Cuba and the Soviet Union, so all that information was certainly available to the person who wrote the October 16th memorandum. Oh, but you never pass all the operational information to the other agencies unless there was a need for them to have it. Okay, should any memorandum have been written within the station identifying Oswald also as having been to the Cuban embassy, even if he's not passed to the FBI? They may have. I didn't think that connection was made at that time. But I don't know. You'll have to ask someone else that. To the extent that the station had information as of October 16th that Oswald had been to the Cuban consulate, should that information have been relayed to headquarters? Yes. Do you have any knowledge about whether that information was conveyed to headquarters prior to the assassination? I can't remember. I don't think that the connection was made until afterwards. Though it would be fair to say that in September 28th intercept, which is referenced in the October 16th memo, that Cuba is certainly, I think that they were getting that 28th date from this intercept. You're referring to attachment F. Like last Saturday here. Well, the text of the October 16th memorandum says that this officer determined that Oswald had been at the Soviet embassy on the 28th and had talked with Kostakov. Your inference would be that the information came exclusively from the October 1st intercept. That's what I thought. I want to come back to this question by looking at some other documents, but I want to finish one last thing with exhibit number 10, the routing that is at the bottom of exhibit number 10. Do you see where it suggests that it goes to the ambassador, the minister, and other officials? And that's at the bottom of the page on the October 16th memorandum. Do you see that? Yes, it's just right. Were you the person responsible for relaying information to the legal attaché? I think this was written by the people at the Soviet desk, and I gave it to them, or they gave me a copy of it after they sent it out. But I could have written it. I don't know. I don't remember. You could have written the October 16th memorandum. Yeah, I could have, but I don't remember doing it. You'd have to look at the original files to see, but I don't think there's anything in this message that's not in this transcript. Were you the person responsible for conveying the October 16th memorandum to the legal attaché in your capacity as head of liaison? I'm not sure that I was the one who delivered it to them, but I would have had a copy. That would have been in our file. Is there any difference, or can you explain the difference to me between a legal attaché and liaison, with legal attaché with appears to be lower? This means the original went to the ambassador, one went to the minister, and one went to the counselor of political affairs. One went to the regional security officer, one went to the legal attaché, one went to the naval attaché, and one went to INS. Then we put a copy in Oswald's file. This part went out, and the rest of this stayed inside, and there was a copy in this file, a copy in a file called liaison with legal attaché, and a copy in a file called liaison with naval attaché. So the last four entries all refer to local CIA station files where they should be filed, station files. And do you know where the station files are now? I have no idea. Ms. Goodpasture, I have a question about the possibility of there being missing cables or missing communications between Mexico City Station and headquarters related to the Oswald visit prior to the assassination. What I'd like to do is, you mean prior to the assassination? Yes. Okay, what I'd like to do is show you some more pages from a deposition that was taken of Mr. Ray Rocca, who was a CI at the time of the deposition. Now, he's in another world. The deposition is dated July 17th, 1978, and I'll show you just a few pages from that, and it's very brief, but I'd like to see if this helps refresh your recollection about whether there may have been cables relating to Oswald and Cuba prior to the assassination. I'll note for the record, deposition pages being shown to Ms. Goodpasture are from 82 and 83. Guys, if you can pull Mr. Ray Rocca's deposition, July 17th, 78, I'd really appreciate it. All I can say about this is I think Mr. Rocca was mistaken. We have records from the Kronos. So Mr. Rocca is obviously identifying some pre-assassination communications that she's pretending don't exist. I think he was mistaken with that kind of traffic flying around. It's easy to see how he could be mistaken. I didn't think that I was ever mistaken when I was 30 years old, and I have learned that I'm mistaken more often than I'm correct at the current age. Let me have the next document marked as exhibit number 11. Do you want these back? Yes, thank you. What are we going to do with number 10? I'll take number 10, and I'll state for the record that number 10 appears to be on its face a draft. Who are Shapiro and Olander? That's how it was faxed. Withdraw what I said before. From a draft manuscript of the Foul Foe book, which purports to be an account of the writer's career in intelligence, the writer's, quote, Ian Maxwell, unquote, believed to be the pen name of Mr. Wynne Scott. Ms. Goodpasture, do you have any time to previously seen document or a version of the document marked Exhibit 10? This is heady stuff, isn't it? When was this written? I don't know. I've been told that he wrote this after he retired from the agency, while he was in Mexico City. I saw a draft, which may have been this, in Washington in 77. I can't explain it. I don't think it's based on any records other than what you've seen with a narrative interpretation to it to make it easier for people to read and make a book sell. The fact remains that Mr. Scott knew everything that everybody else knew, and more than any individual knew, and I thought there was a definite message sent to Washington which said that there was no photograph of Oswald. Let me draw your attention particularly to what appears to be page 268 of the manuscript, but it's the third page of the document as marked towards the end, beginning from page 77 of that report referring to the Warren Commission report. The erroneous statement was made that it was not known that Oswald had visited the Cuban embassy until after the assassination. Does that refresh your recollection about any knowledge that may have existed in the station about Oswald visiting the Cuban embassy prior to the assassination? No. If you could look at the next sentence, which I'll read for the record, quote, every piece of information concerning Lee Harvey Oswald was reported immediately after it was received to the U.S. Ambassador Thomas C. Mann by memorandum, the FBI chief in Mexico by memorandum, and to my headquarters by cable, and included in each and every one of these reports was the conversation Oswald had so far as it was known. These reports were made on all his contacts with both the Cuban and consulate and with the Soviets. We can prove that's not true by the records that we've just been over. So she's lying already, right? So Ray Rocca is saying that there's all kinds of records and that everybody was made aware of everything. So yeah, we need to get his deposition for sure. And she's just fucking covering for the CIA, period. That's all she's doing. She's like, we can prove that's not true by the records. So by the only records we have, we can say that those are the only records that exist because they're the only ones that we have, right? That's what she's saying. The question that lurks here is whether Mr. Scott is incorrect or whether there were additional communications reports that we don't know about. I can't answer that question except that I think we have to go by the record of what we have. I don't know that anyone would take anything from the records. When I left there, it was a complete chrono, not only of our transcripts, but of everything we sent out to the other agencies. When it dated on the other dates when they were sent out. Do you recall now whether there was anything in the chrono for the period prior to the assassination, in addition to the records that we have looked at today? Oh, I don't know that. I wouldn't. Without comparing them, I couldn't say. I just don't know. I don't recall. Do you know any reason why Mr. Scott would have stated that there were contacts between Oswald and the Cubans, that the station was aware of them, and that the information had been conveyed to headquarters if that information were not correct? The only way I could explain that would be that he's writing for a publication. Back in '63, no one ever thought that under their wildest stretch of imagination that the information, this secret information, would be published, and he may have been writing it for publication and thinking it would never be checked, or he may not have not remembered it. He may have been writing from his memory, and his memory may have been way off. May have been wrong, but I could speculate forever. I don't know. I can't answer that. Do you know anything in Mr. Scott's personality, as you've observed it, that would lead you to believe that he would be as incorrect about this as you've suggested that he is? No, that's the puzzling thing that's so puzzling about it. I can't explain why there are mistakes in Dave Phillips' book either. It may just be a writer doesn't have always access to the facts and they just fill in, and I can't answer that question because I don't know. That's so goddamn funny. You got Win Scott writing books about Oswald. You got Dave Phillips writing books about fucking Oswald. And you got Ann Goodpasture going, I don't know what the fuck these guys are talking about. Oh, it's hilarious. But Mr. Scott signed off on every communication in this whole case, and if anybody had known about this and not consistent with the records, then he would have known. Well, would it be fair to say to you, then, that he was in a better position to know the scope of the communications with headquarters than would anyone else in the station? Oh, yes. So if there had been communications regarding Oswald in Cuba, Mr. Scott would have been in a better position to know that. Better than I would, or you would. I'd like to mark the next document as Exhibit 11. Thank you, number 12. They go over a whole bunch of other number jargon. Ms. Goodpasture, do you recognize the handwriting in this margin? That's mine. Could you read the part of the handwriting that's yours, please? Quote, the caller from the Cuban embassy was unidentified until headquarters sent traces on Oswald, and the invoices were compared by Fineglass. Fineglass was the Russian translator. Feinglass. Let's pull everything on Mr. Fineglass. Do you recall when you wrote the statement in the margin? No, I think this is the same document that the House committee asked me when I wrote something and I can't remember. When you refer to the traces on Oswald, were you referring to the October 10th cable from headquarters to the station document we previously looked at? Whatever the date of that cable was, yes, the answer to the 1st of October cable, the 8th of October cable. So you're referring then to the document that's marked, right, this Deposition Exhibit 8. Is that correct? Yes. What is it? What is your understanding that Mr. Fineglass, a pseudonym, did after the October 10th cable arrived at the station? Maybe Fineglass is one of the Terrasofts, since Fineglass is a pseudonym. He listened to the reels, the voices, and what reels did he compare? Well, I think he had the transcripts from the Cuban call and one other. And so the Cuban call would have been, now it may have been that he remembered those as the same person. So then if I'm understanding that, after October 10th, Mr. Fineglass identifies the caller in the October 1st intercept with the caller in the September 28th intercept. That's what I think. Now, the September 28th intercept refers to Cuba, as you recall, right? So did Mr. Fineglass then make the identification prior to the assassination? Prior to the assassination and prior to Sylvia Duran's arrest? Yes. Is that the answer? Yes, I was mistaken about what I remembered. So, which is what I feel about my memory on something that I can't check the records for. So that would mean that at least one extent, Mr. Scott's manuscript that we looked at previously would be correct in that Oswald was identified as being at the Cuban embassy prior to the assassination. Is that fair to say? Right. Does that suggest to you the possibility if Mr. Scott was correct on Oswald? The one thing, he would be correct in all of them? No, but that Mr. Rocca's testimony that he remembered, or he thought he might have remembered it, was certainly unclear in the deposition that he thought he might have remembered communications regarding Cuba prior to the assassination. I don't know if we sent anything up to headquarters before the assassination. You'd have to check the chronos to see when the first cable went to Washington advising them that he made contact with the Cuban embassy. One of the questions for us as we are attempting to collect all the records and set the records straight is trying to determine whether all the records have in fact been identified, and I personally am unaware of any communication regarding Cuba until after the assassination. To headquarters until after the assassination, although there was some evidence that would suggest that there was knowledge about that, as well as Mr. Scott and Mr. Rocca suggesting that there were communications prior to the assassination. This was dated the 20th of October. You're referring to the newspaper article, right? In Exhibit 12. This, I don't know when the voice comparison was made. I just don't know. I don't know whether the reels were still there unerased. It sticks in my mind that the reels were kept 2 weeks, but I believe that this was a copy. We kept this reel, but was brought in. I don't know if that was the 28th of October transcript reel. You mean the 28th of September? I mean the 28th of September. What I'm getting at is this could have been, this identification could have not been made until later. When you said you had recollection of the tape having been brought in reference to the October 1st intercept, what do you mean by the tape having been brought in? Well, they made a copy at the tape center. They would have made a copy of that portion of the call and leave the other tape, the main tape, running, and then we would have the copy, and the transcript was made from the translation, made from the copy, the translation and the reel that came in. So in other words, if that is what happened in this particular case, on the 2nd of October, there would have been 2 tapes of the conversation, one master, and the other one was a segment of a single conversation, right? And as your recollection, there was a tape of this conversation from the first. Yeah, I think there was. I'd like to show you your document. It was known at the time as House Select Committee on the Assassinations, marked Exhibit 13. I'll state for the record that this is a document that has come from the Lyndon B. Johnson Library and appears on its face to be a November 23rd, 63 transcript of a telephone call between J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson. So this is the day after the assassination. Ms. Goodpasture, I'd like to draw your attention to the large paragraph on page 2, but you should feel free to read as much of the document as you would feel. Then they go off the record for a bit. And then then the attorney asks, let me read the record for a particular portion of the conversation that I would like to draw attention to. This is a statement presumably being made by J. Edgar Hoover to President Johnson the day after the assassination in response to President Johnson's request. Have you established any more about the Soviet visit to the Soviet embassy in Mexico in September? J. Edgar Hoover answers, no, that's one angle that's very confusing for this reason. We have up here the tape and the photograph of the man who was at the Soviet embassy using Oswald's name. That picture and the tape do not correspond to this man's voice nor to his appearance. In other words, it appears that there is a second person who was at the Soviet embassy down there. End of quote. The paragraph continues, but that's the portion I'd like to draw Miss Goodpasture's attention to. Do you yourself have any knowledge or recollection about a tape of the voice from October 1st transcript having given to the FBI? No. Do you have any knowledge about the tape being identified after the assassination as not having Oswald's voice on it? No, I don't know what happened to the tape after I brought it in. I think I brought a tape in and it was given to the redacted, and I'm sure that they would have sent it to Washington. But what happened from there, I don't know. Is there any record in the headquarters files that a tape was sent to the FBI? I haven't seen one. So here we go. We got more lies busted because Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover were talking about things on the phone that obviously came from Mexico City Station that Ann Goodpasture was right in the middle of that she's claiming not have any fucking knowledge of, right? Fuck her. After the assassination, look in the records. There might be a reference to some FBI agent who carried material to Laredo. I believe they carried a photograph and they may have carried a tape dub. Have you interviewed someone by the name of Eldon Rudd? No. Now, I think he refused to talk to the House committee because he was a congressman at the time, but he had been an FBI agent in Mexico, and I seem to recall he carried something up to the border the night of the assassination or the next day, but that should be in records. Ooh, let's pull everything on Eldon. What was that? Eldon Rudd, ELDONRUDD, and what he possibly carried up to the border the night of the assassination. Do you have any recollection of any other copies of any of the tapes being made after the assassination? No, I don't, but there may have been. I don't know. I can't answer that. I've spoken with 2 Warren Commission staff members who went to Mexico City and both told me that they heard the tape after the assassination, obviously. Do you have any knowledge or information regarding tapes that may have been played to those Warren Commission staffers? No, it may have been a tape that Win Scott had squirreled away in his safe. Did you ever hear any discussion or even gossip with people regarding Win Scott's possibility of having a tape in his safe? No. Are you talking to Earhart? No. He might remember whether he made a duplicate and how many copies were made. Would he have been the one most likely to have made copies? He would have been the one that would have been given it to me to bring in. Now, there's also a possibility that the redacted could have taken the tape directly to Win, his redacted contact at the tap operation, but I think that master tape has been erased by the time of the assassination. Do you know whether there was more than one master tape? No, I think there was only one, but then again, there was never a tape center, and the Earhart was there all the time. Do you know where he is now? No, I have no idea. I think he was still in Mexico when I left. I'm not sure. Okay, along this line, I'd like to show you a portion of a deposition transcript from a person who testified under the pseudonym of John Skelso, and that was redacted on May 16, 1978 to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He's making reference to the October 1st intercept. Please take a moment to read that. There wasn't a question, but actually let me show you, having shown you that document, which I'll state for the record is 76 and 77 of the Skelso deposition. We got to pull that too, the Skelso deposition, in conjunction with a document that's now been marked Deposition Exhibit 14 that is identified as record number 10004-10199, which appears on its face to be a memorandum written by John Skelso, who was also chief of Western Hemisphere 3 and was, according to the CIA, written on December 13th, 1963. So this report is also purportedly was written by the same person whose testimony you just read. I would like you to read the last paragraph, beginning with "as soon as." I'll read the paragraph for the record. As soon as our Mexico City station realized that Lee Oswald was the prime suspect, it began rescreening all the written telephone transcripts in its files covering the Soviet embassy for the pertinent period. The actual tapes were also reviewed, but many of them had been erased after the normal 2-week wait. When Mr. Skelso refers to actual tapes also reviewed, do you have any idea of what he's making reference to? I think he's making reference to the tapes on which Oswald's name appeared, as well as the other transcripts that were identified. The other transcripts identified as, wait a minute, we're talking about the 22nd of November, the day of the assassination. It began rescreening all the telephone transcripts covering the pertinent actual tapes were also received and reviewed. I don't know how many tapes we had, but I thought what he may have meant was that we went back to the base to look to review the tapes for dates in which these conversations occurred, but found that the ones that we really wanted to listen to again had been erased because they were more than 2 weeks old. I think, guys, you really believe the CIA just erases tapes after 2 weeks? Give me a fucking break. I think that what he meant by actual tapes was that they went back to the base and overused tapes, all of them, to make sure that there were ones for the dates that we're interested in and not been erased. Sure, do you understand that this then means for him to have said that the actual tapes were also reviewed, but all of them had been erased or some of them had been erased? No, what I think he's saying is that they went to the room where the tapes were kept and reviewed and looked through them, but many of the tapes had been erased so that we didn't have the tapes from the day going all the way back. So as many of the tapes, we had like 500 tapes that we worked with, or 5,000. They went to this room and reviewed all the tapes, and they found that there were 90% of them were there, but the other percentage had been erased. Many of them had been erased, but not necessarily many that were involved in transcripts. In his testimony on page 77, he states in response to a question about voice comparison being made, he says, yes, tapes were probably still in existence. Let me see. All right, so we're coming to the end of this document here, and it looks like they're just starting to go over some miscellaneous, hey, where are these documents? Hey, I don't know where the documents are. So, yeah, we're going to wrap it up here. The rest of this is just some courtroom jargon. So, Ms. Goodpasture's lying, clearly lying. She's clearly covering for her activities involving the recordings of Oswald, which were obviously there. The president knew they were there. J. Edgar Hoover knew they were there the day after the assassination, but Miss Goodpasture, who was right in the middle of it and the one who sends the cables, she doesn't know about it. Give me a fucking break. They're all fucking lying. So now that we've wrapped up this document, we have one more of Miss Goodpasture to get through. We have a couple of David Atlee Phillips. We're going to try to find all the people connected to Mexico City. Maybe I'll do a different show tomorrow to break it up just a little bit. But yeah, we're all going to be experts on Mexico City by the time we're done here, right? So that's going to do it for today, guys. I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks.